no, sorry, like Sankey has already said, at its core, the whole idea is we're trying to find different ways to incorporate our volunteers in this kind of new crazy world that we're living in, and how that might work. So there's kind of two feedback programs, but today we're just only going to focus on factory feedback. So that is any kind of student submits in a short piece of writing, whether that might be poetry or a short story. They submit it to us. We kind of give you guys this piece of writing. You give it one round of feedback. We give it back to the students to kind of rework and rejig. They send it back to us. And in return, we get to publish a piece of their writing on our website, and they also receive a $50 Woolies voucher. And to just very quickly touch on pen power as well, that's not something we're quite considering yet, but that's kind of more so for primary school age kids. And if that ever develops any further, I'm sure Sankey will kind of send out another email about that. So in terms of the volunteers that we have today, as I understand that all the volunteers we have here have worked with Story Factory before, or have done an in-person workshop. So for the most part, you guys kind of already know how that process works in terms of working with students. And all we're doing today is kind of give you additional tools, additional skills, kind of help that process along a little bit. And to kind of touch on quickly a little bit more with factory feedback, it will go over a term at the very least, and you will most likely kind of be receiving a new student every week. But that will also, I guess, depend on your schedule as well. And that's something you can kind of hash out with Sankey and Twee a little bit more once we start getting work in. So again, how it's going to work is you'll be sent a piece of writing from a student from Story Factory. This is all subject to change because this is something we're still trying to figure and work out. But for the most part, we're thinking that this piece of writing is going to be submitted through Google Docs, and the whole interaction and the whole feedback process will also be done through Google Documents. And there'll be some time at the end for me to quickly go through what that actually looks like. And if there's anyone that feels like they need a bit more training on that part and how to use Google Docs, that's something that Sankey can also organize as well. And in terms of the support, this isn't just a one-off thing. After this program, it's not like we're going to kind of leave you on your own just to receive work and give feedback and that's it. We're not expecting you guys to be, professionals as well. Many of you guys are doing this out of your own free time, just out of a love for helping the students that we work with. So after this, not only do you have access to myself, Lamissa, Bilal, all of the storytellers, if you feel like you're ever stuck on giving feedback, but also we understand that, the world is kind of in a crazy place at the moment as well. So if anything kind of happens with your schedule as well, that's something that Sankey and Twee will happily work with you to kind of hash out. And in terms of resources, not only do we have the workshop today, we also have a tip sheet that we've created, which I'm not too sure whether Sankey has sent that out yet. No. So that's something Sankey will send out afterwards. But then also beyond that, if you feel like you need kind of more resources, anything really to kind of help you with this process, please just let us know, and that's something that we're happy to create as well. And in terms of student safety, a lot of you already know kind of what Story Factory kind of expects from our volunteers when volunteers are working with our students. Working online is no exception. Any type of feedback that's kind of taking place will be monitored, and storytellers will kind of be doing spot checks and reviewing feedback before it goes back to the students. And with that being said, we can hopefully now start touching on kind of the skills development aspect. Lamissa, if you're there, do you want to run this part?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. It's so nice to see familiar faces, by the way. So like Kevin said, a lot of the stuff that, a lot of the feedback that you'll be giving is mostly the support that you provide to the students, and giving them a positive experience. It's definitely what we do in classrooms already, so everybody's already really familiar with that. It's just adding a little bit of focus on the details of what students write, and we'll be giving you help on how to pick those details out. Yeah, I think that's it for this one. Kevin, would you like to add anything?
There we go. No, that's pretty much it. So we're pretty much now, before we kind of jump into kind of, giving you guys some of these tools that you might use, we just kind of want to see where you guys are at in terms of your kind of like feedback. So again, this isn't something to kind of too stress about. This is just like something to kind of warm us up as we kind of look into this. So in a minute, I'm going to share 2 pieces of writing with you. And what we'd like you to do is kind of give some feedback to it. And right here, it's a kind of a tool that we like to use is something called 1 star and 1 wish. And I guess you can consider this the first thing that we're going to teach you guys today. So whether you might be a professional editor, proofreader, or just someone that's just kind of helping out, this is a kind of, I think, a really simple but also effective tool that you can use. So with 1 star, 1 star basically means something you like about the piece, something that you've noticed, a detail that you like. And 1 wish, as you can see on the screen there, is something that you think can be improved, a question that you have, or something that you kind of want to see more of. So from everyone, what we like is 1 star, 1 wish, then also kind of any additional feedback that you noticed about the piece. And then with that, kind of just sending that back into chat. I could probably give you guys maybe a minute or so. Again, don't worry, you don't have to stress out too much about it. Just kind of like quick things that you notice about the pieces. And then send that into the chat. Now, if you're a little bit nervous of other people reading your feedback, that's fine. If you could maybe like send it, I guess, privately to me in the chat or to any of the other storytellers, that would be great. So before I show you the first piece of writing, is there any questions about the instructions I've just gave? I can't see if you got hands up. No, it looks like everybody is clear. Awesome. So I will show you the first piece of writing. There we go. So here we have the first piece of writing. I will give you guys 1 minute to write in the chat 1 wish, 1 star, 1 wish, and any other feedback that you may have. And I will give you guys a minute starting from now.
Oh, 3 wishes. Um, 3 wishes. Three wishes. 3 wishes. 3 wishes.
Cool. And just maybe wrapping up the last sentence that you are on now. And it's okay if you didn't reach, whether you didn't reach the wish or the feedback, that's completely fine as well. So that's the first piece. I'm going to now show you the next piece. And again, I'll give you another minute to write 1 star, 1 wish, and any additional feedback that you may have.
2 stars. 2 stars.
Fantastic. And again, just wrapping up, the sentence that you're on right now. Again, it does not matter if you didn't reach a certain part or aspect. Cool. So thank you everyone for doing that. Especially if you've never done something like this before, I can probably understand how nerve-wracking that it may be. And also, just in case I probably didn't make it clear before, I'm just going to get back to here. So not only are we've just looked at kind of like one skill, one very easy, effective technique that you might want to use, the ones that one wish. The additional feedback, obviously, that's what myself and Lemissa are going to try to cover today. How do we actually give that additional feedback? And before we kind of like jump into that as well, I just wanted to quickly address kind of like maybe any fears that any of the volunteers might have kind of doing this right now. And as I understand it, we have kind of like a wide range of volunteers with varying skill levels. You know, I understand some of you might be kind of like professional editors and proofreaders or copywriters. And again, some of you might just be individuals who just really love working with kids and wanting them to kind of reach their full potential. But you might be nervous about how that, you know, I don't know how to give feedback. And what I want to say is that, you know, hopefully after today, we will kind of equip you with some skills to be able to deal with that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as long as your feedback comes from a place where we are addressing certain outcomes, which Lemissa will talk about next, I think it's completely fine. You do not have to be a professional editor, writer, proofreader to be able to kind of give genuine, effective feedback to students. So again, as long as your feedback comes from a place where you're addressing certain outcomes, you're going to be completely fine. And so next up, I'm going to get Lemissa to kind of talk about these outcomes and what we're looking for them to kind of achieve from doing this program.
Okay. So what we're generally looking for is developing skills to become better writers. So anything that will help the students, not just in their writing, but their confidence as well. So just having conversations with them on the doc, asking them a lot of questions if you're confused about something, and getting them to really understand their own writing as much as the reader's understanding it as well. So that's the next thing. So developing confidence, exchanging feedback in an environment where students can make mistakes, which I think everyone is already so amazing at in the classrooms, asking students a lot of questions, allowing them to think through things before we give them those answers, not focusing too much on spelling, all those kinds of things. And then developing creativity and ideas. So those will be the outcomes that we're looking for in Factory B.
Yeah. So there's, again, it's very much similar to what we kind of expect from our volunteers when they're already working in the classroom. So again, in terms of you giving feedback, as long as you're kind of hitting these points, regardless of how detailed or how detail-oriented your feedback might be, as long as they're kind of hitting these points, you should be quite fine. And next up, I wanted to hit it. Cool. What I wanted to quickly touch on is I wanted to kind of open up to the group to kind of just quickly maybe talk about their experiences in the classroom, any of the workshops they've done, and maybe just kind of focus on how you work with the students and what you have found to work best for you when you have worked with students. So I can't see everyone on screen right now, but if you have something that you'd like to share in terms of how you work with students and any kind of effective ways you have, just put your hands up if you'd like to share that. So I'm just gonna quickly look through to see if anyone has their hands up. No, it looks like everyone is quite shy, wanting to share. Yes, Carl, I believe. Would you like to share?
Not really, but no one else is, so I might as well go.
Thank you.
I am shy. I've done a couple of volunteering sessions at primary school level, like year 4, year 5 type levels, and I've found that it's good to talk about what the student wants to write before they start writing, so they can get a clear picture in their mind who the characters are, what the setting is, and what actions the characters will take in relation to that setting.
Excellent.
And maybe even jot down a few key words or points they want to get across.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
But to be honest, and I put it in the chat, a lot of the time in helping those students write was dealing with spelling and grammar, because they were handwriting and we were helping them write. And if they weren't sure about how to spell a word, they didn't want to attempt it. And so they'd say, "Oh, sir, how do you spell X or Y or whatever?" And my spelling isn't fantastic at the best of times. And so I guess the question is, for these feedback sessions, do the students know that we're not going to focus on spelling or grammar? Or will they think, if we've given feedback that doesn't touch on those areas, that they're very competent in those spaces?
That is a very good question that you... There's a very great question that you've asked her, and I'll quickly touch on that. So the answer is yes and no. So no, in the sense that the main focus isn't going to be on spelling and grammar. There will be some focus on that, but we're not expecting you to be perfect at it as well. And what we're going to go through today is, what can we look at when we look at a piece of writing that's not just about spelling, that's not just about grammar? What other things can we look at during a piece? So, and what other elements can we draw on rather than just spelling and grammar that can still improve a piece of writing? So hopefully that's what we're going to aim to kind of give you guys, so that you're not just worried about spelling and grammar. But that was a great question, so thank you for asking that, Carl. Cool. So I am going to move on. So just kind of based on what Carl has said, boom. So that in terms of when volunteers are working in a workshop, what I've noticed anyway is that, again, a lot of their interaction between the volunteers and the students is that it's mostly encouragement. It's a lot to do with kind of talking about the work itself and kind of getting them excited to actually put ideas down on the page. And, you know, there is some focus on the details, which might be spelling and grammar, and kids asking you a lot about that. Now, in terms of the feedback factory, that's not going to change, really. We're still kind of expecting our volunteers to still have that kind of great interaction with the students, albeit it might be a bit different now that it's online. But we still want that kind of feeling a student gets when they kind of have that one-on-one attention. And what you're going to do is, yes, there is going to be some more of the added details, and that's what Limisa and I is going to touch on. That's beyond just spelling and grammar. Cool. So next up, this is very much related to, I guess, kind of also framing how you give students feedback. And the main idea I kind of work with when I ever give feedback, not only to students, but even just to kind of friends that are writers or anything of that sort, is that I kind of put a big disclaimer, is that you don't have to listen to a word I say. And that's something that you might want to begin with your students as well. But if they've done a Story Factory workshop before, it's probably something that they're going to be very familiar with. And again, it kind of goes back to the outcomes that we were talking about before, that not only do we want them to be to develop them into great writers, but to feel confident in what they do. So that to be able to kind of develop that confidence, we believe that we need to kind of say that our suggestions are our feedback are just suggestions, and that they're really just optional as well. And that we found that over time, students, when they feel like they've given a choice to take on certain pieces of advice or feedback, they grow to become more receptive to those ideas into the future. And that ultimately, us as workshop facilitators or as volunteers, that we're here to kind of nudge them in the right way, to kind of provide a certain guidance and structure. And really, if anything, we're just kind of a soundboard to test these ideas. Now, we're almost there to actually learning how to give this feedback. But before that, how do I actually kind of give feedback? today, what Lemissa and I are kind of going to share with you, they're not hard and fast rules. These is literally something that we've kind of just talked about, and we found what's kind of going to be the most effective for our volunteers to be able to take on and then to be able to utilize as well as quickly as possible. And that over time, you're going to find your own way to kind of give feedback, and you'll find out what works and what doesn't, and that there just isn't any one way. But what we are going to give you today is certain templates and maybe a sort of a checklist that you can use when you're given a piece of writing to look over. So, so first up, so maybe before we kind of delve into this, was there maybe, Sankey, maybe you can answer me, was there any kind of questions in the chat or anything like that that we might need to answer before we move into this? Give me some time to drink water as well.
Just unmute myself. I feel like there's been a lot of great conversations going back and forth, sharing tips on what's worked for some of the tutors in previous workshops and stuff. What I'll do is I'll save the chat and then pull all of that together and pop it at the bottom of the tip sheet that we send out after the training session as well, because there's some great stuff. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sankey. So first up, what we're going to talk about is learning how to give personal feedback and learning how to give technical feedback. And we're going to touch on personal first, and Lemissa is going to take over that in a second. But if there's anything you can take out from today, it's that, you know, not only have we given you like a simple tool, the whole 1 star, 1 wish, but in terms of a broader way of being able to give feedback, I personally believe that anyone is able to kind of give personal feedback, and Lemissa is probably going to touch on that on why in just a bit. So Lemissa, if you want to take over.
So when we're discussing this, Kevin kindly split it up into personal and technical feedback, which I think works really well. So personal feedback is all about how you make the student feel about their own writing, what you can do in terms of confidence, and it's framed in quite easily. A lot of you have put it in the chat, which is amazing, asking a lot of questions. So how does that piece of writing make you feel? If you want anything to be extended on, like you've written the 1 star, 1 wish, if you want anything to be extended on in the writing, asking questions on how to get to that is really awesome as well. Another thing is using very specific and honest praise. So training your eye to notice small details, what you can identify in the writing. So I think an example for honest praise would be picking out a detail of their work and commenting on that specifically rather than the entire piece of work. And then providing constructive feedback. So again, not giving the suggestions, but asking questions, and again, being a soundboard for them to figure out how they can critically think about what they want their own piece of writing to be. What else? Oops. And does the piece achieve what the writer was aiming for? So I think all of that personal feedback is just coming down to their confidence and what they know they want their own writing to be. And we're helping them try to get to that, basically. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Lemissa. And the reason why I personally believe that, you know, if there's one thing that everyone can kind of take out of today is kind of this idea of personal feedback, is that it's very much, how does this piece of writing relate to you? How do you feel about this writing? Now, at first you might find it a bit hard that, like, you know, how does it make me feel? I don't know. But I think it's something, just like with anything else, it's something you've got to practice. So if there's one kind of main idea from this kind of slide here that I'd like you guys to kind of take away, is just to notice these small details, whatever they might be. Is there a certain word choice? Is there a certain phrase? Is there a certain way how they organize words in a particular order? Just as much as you can, what can you kind of derive from the piece of writing that you've been given, and how does it make you feel? I think that's probably the biggest thing that you guys can take away from that. And again, that's why I think that everyone has the ability to be able to kind of reflect and think about how a piece of writing makes them feel. So just to break it a bit, again, just so you're not always listening to myself and Lemissa talk, is we're probably going to break it up with an activity. Yeah. Cool. Something very simple, and I want you guys to practice kind of like your personal feedback. I wandered lonely as a cloud. A very short sentence. I would like you guys again in the chat, if you can, to just quickly answer. How does the piece of writing there make you feel? And then one question you might have for this writer. And again, we're not expecting, you know, a long essay or, you know, something deep or profound, you know. It's literally, how does the piece make you feel? And maybe one question you might have. I'll probably give you guys 45 seconds to a minute to do that. Go ahead.
Send. One question.
I'm enjoying the strong feelings about the poet, just as an aside.
Cool. And just wrapping up your sentence right there. I'm just going quickly through the chat now. Great responses, essentially. I wonder if you guys actually even need to do this workshop, but no, all of this really great stuff coming out, really stuff that we are already expecting. So great work, everyone, and thank you for everyone that contributed. Okay.
Kevin,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we move on, I missed that Fiona had a question.
Oh, yeah?
When you asked me if there were any questions in the chat, and I missed hers. So, Fiona.
All right, have I unmuted?
You have unmuted.
Yes.
Oh, I was just going to ask Kevin and the other guys, obviously when you go into a high school, and we're going to be mainly dealing with high school kids here, it's so important to establish a rapport with these high school kids, and that was always the hardest part of working in high schools as opposed to primary schools because they're teenagers. And it was always much easier if you could talk in person about the rugby league or what your teenagers were doing or Fortnite or whatever. I'm guessing with this project, it's not as important to establish a one-on-one rapport with the student because they're just getting feedback generally from someone who works at Story Factory. Is that right?
Yeah, so maybe I'll quickly answer that, and if anyone else has something to chip in, please feel free. Is that, yeah, that's very much true. For, you know, again, these students are only getting like one round of feedback before their thing is submitted. So in the best case scenario, we would love to find some way to kind of build rapport with the students that we're receiving this.
Uh-oh, is he frozen?
Frozen.
Oh no.
So I'm going to jump in. I think where we aren't able to build rapport is kind of replaced by trying to give the students a really positive experience of receiving feedback. And so that's kind of where the rapport building invisibly happens. And so
without anticipating that, then when it's in person, it's easier to give more tricky feedback because you can have a bit of a joke with them and say, oh, I know you can do better than that, try again, or you know, that sounds a bit dull or whatever. You can do that if you've got a relationship with them. So this is more really not really about being full-blown editors. It's about making them feel positive about their writing.
Yeah, and just acknowledging like the good things that you've noticed about it, and then just giving them like one or two kind of helpful, handy hints to, that they could kind of expand upon if they choose to in their own time.
Okay, thanks, Sankey. Thanks, guys.
Tricky things without being able to see the student and not having an exchange as well.
Yeah.
Slightly different to compel. I think we've lost Kevin. I'm going to go.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay, welcome back.
I'll unmute myself. I'll mute
co-host, Sankey.
I will just
while that's happening, can I mention something?
Yes.
Sorry, I've been like silently listening from the shadows. One super interesting thing about the students who are going to be submitting for factory feedback, who are trying to get feedback from us, and I think the biggest distinction between them and the students we regularly work with in class is that they've approached us. So for the most part, they're like, I heard about this program. I am at least vaguely interested in writing or storytelling. So I'm emailing and saying that I would like to share something. So I think that's a kind of good distinction to make. And the other thing, just from personal experience in giving students written feedback and having never met them in person, is that idea of like that star that Kevin and Lamisa were talking about earlier is super essential for that rapport building when you're working with a student, to kind of genuinely compliment them and say, this is a thing that from my perspective as an adult who is spending time reading or writing, I really appreciate. This is something I've recognized that you've done well. And that gives you kind of credence in the young person's mind. The fact that you've like, you know, spent the time to write a sentence or two of something that went really well and talked about how it affected you means that you kind of are invested enough in their work that when you say something like, and I also want to know more about this, or I would suggest that you change this, they have more respect for the feedback that you're giving them because you've given them that respect in their writing in turn. So I found that really, really helpful.
Thanks, Bilal. And Kevin, where's Kevin?
There we go. I got it.
Hey, welcome back.
Hello. Thank you. And sorry for that drop out there. That was really weird. Bilal and I dropped out at the same time. So we have Lorena that raised her hand. Is there a question you'd like to ask Lorena?
Yes, in following on from what those previous two questions, so the student has already been motivated to write. So we're going straight to like step 2 of normal work. We don't have to go through the motivating, the purpose, all of that. We're moving straight into right, almost finished product from the young person's point of view. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
basically.
Yes. Yes.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Lorena. All right, so I think we shall move on to the next bit, which is technical feedback. And this is for the rest of the workshop. This is what we're going to mainly focus on. So again, it refers kind of to the technical aspects of the pieces, and I guess in a way, kind of the rules of writing. And the way we're going to approach this is we're gonna kind of like separate these into certain categories or groups, which I will hopefully explain properly in a second. So the first way to kind of approach this when you receive a piece of writing is there's kind of 3 things that you can kind of look at and kind of check. So there's the revising of the piece, where you're looking at certain content and the elements. Do they need to be arranged? How does it work as a piece? How does it flow? The editing bit, which is the spelling, grammar, and the punctuation. And then also kind of like the future. So what are they going to do next? What do you want from them once they kind of go away to rework the piece? And when you get it back, what do you want to have? What do you want them to have achieved? So, and what we're going to focus on is just the first point, which is the revising. And what are some of the tools you can use when you're looking at a piece to revise a piece of writing? And how does that differ between a piece of poetry and a piece of prose? But before we go on to that, just because we could talk about just these 3 points for a very long time, what I'm going to do is on the screen, you should see 9 statements or actions that you might want to do when you're looking at a piece. What I would like to do is there's 9 statements there. I would like you guys to separate these 9 statements into 3 categories, which are revising, editing, and future. And just to give you guys just a quick hint, is that for these 9 statements, there's 3 for revising, 3 for editing, and 3 for future. So what I'd like you guys to do is just in the chat, put a heading like revising, and then pick, you don't have to write out the whole sentence, just pick the numbers you believe are best suited to revising. And do the same thing for editing and the same thing for future. So select, you pretty much mix and matching. So selecting the 3 statements that best fit into revising, editing, and future. And I'll give you guys maybe a minute and a half to do that. Do we have any questions about this activity before we move on? And maybe again, just like what Lorena did, if you have a question, maybe you can raise your hands and that way I can also see it easier. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So I'll give you guys a minute and a half to do that.
Where are they?
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Number 2, 1. One is 2, future.
It's 30 more seconds. Cool, and just wrapping up now. So we're not going to go through each of these answers, that will take forever, but just for your own benefit, this is what we identified as which statements best suited to each category. Do you guys have any, if you guys have any questions about any particular statements or things that you might do for peace, if it doesn't make sense, or would you like clarification on any particular points? Again, if hands up, you can put your hands up on Zoom if you've got a question. If not,
what does the first editing one mean? I couldn't understand it.
Yeah. So just for everyone's benefit, the first one on the editing is, this is technically the correct way or word when writing this, but you are free to do this for this reason. And I think you guys might, and Bilal and Lemessa, feel free to jump in if I'm bungling this up. But the way I see that is when you're working with students, you'll find students using a word in a particular way that's not necessarily the correct way to use a word for its meaning, especially when writing poetry, but they're still trying to get across a certain idea. And when you kind of talk to the student, you realize, oh, the reason they chose this word was to try to get across this particular feeling or action. And when that happens, you can say, I can see what you're trying to do with this when you're using this word or this phrase. Here's the actual correct way to use it, but you're more than welcome to kind of use it as it is. Bilal or Lemessa, do you have anything to add on top of that?
I totally do. I can't see when I pop up on screen, so I'm just going to assume you guys can all see me. Part of that phrase, and I saw that there was also a question around the difference between editing and revising, and if you like, Kevin, I can speak a little bit to that. But for this is technically the correct way or word, I wanted to put this in mostly because I often work with students who might be recent arrivals to Australia or are still developing language. And I find that a lot of the time when they're creatively writing, there's a lot of experimentation with the words that they're using. And they'll put words in and they'll 100% believe that they are the correct word for that sentence, although technically and grammatically, they're not the right word. So you'll read the sentence out to them, you'll read it together, and they won't twig that there's the incorrect word in that sentence. And I find, especially with poetry, but also sometimes in storytelling, I don't want to, and we don't want to, as an organization, speak for the students. So to be able to go, this word that you put in there, if you want to keep that word, you are totally allowed to keep that word. If that's the one that sounds the best to you, that's fine. If you're trying to make it grammatically correct and in terms of spelling, in English, this is the way that it would need to be, but don't feel like you have to do it that way. So I find it especially helpful depending on the level of language and literacy of the student. So that's kind of what that one means.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Carl. That's easy. For revising and editing, the way that we kind of make that distinction in the Story Factory is that revising is kind of big structural changes. When you're looking at a piece of writing and you're like, well, you've kind of told this story in like first person, but what would this be like if you changed it to third person and kind of explored a little bit of a different perspective? Or you started this story with a chase scene and then you go straight into a conversation. Would it work if you kind of switch that around? Whereas the editing is the really granular details where you kind of went, well, you've got this sentence with these 3 adjectives and this 4th one on top as well. What would happen if you kind of got rid of this one word here? How would this sentence sound? So you kind of go into revising, like the big kind of changes, the feelings that you have for the piece, editing, which is a bit more granular and specific, and then into the future, some suggestions that you have for their writing. Is that helpful for the person who asked in chat? You might have dropped out.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was helpful. I guess it's also because I'm a journalist, so I just see them both as editing.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked about it. But yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think part of it as well is when we talk to our students and we even say the word editing, heaps of them will just go, oh my gosh, I hate that so much. And I don't want to edit at all because they kind of associate it with fixing mistakes. But for revising, especially for us, it's about opportunities to improve work, and similar with editing, just on a more specific level. I'm quiet now.
Cool. Excellent. So now we are going to move forward and come on, there we go. And look at revising a bit more and how we might use the revising aspect of the process and how they might apply to both prose and poetry. Now, we are going to be providing, working with certain definitions, working with certain elements. That's not an exhaustive list. That's not a rigid, hard and fast rule. This is something that we're just using as a way to kind of be able to wrap our minds around certain ideas. And that, again, this isn't the only rule, but hopefully this kind of provides a bit more sense for some people, because I think especially for me personally, when I read either poetry or prose, it's very easy to kind of see the difference, but sometimes to kind of explain the difference or to kind of put that into words is a little bit harder. So with the definition that we're going to work with today is that both prose and poetry, they live on this kind of spectrum of literature as opposed to being kind of 2 separate entities. And while prose kind of relies on, I guess, grammatical structure to reflect natural speech, which then turns into full sentences that build into paragraphs, into chapters, into a full story. While poetry kind of relies on a more rhythmic structure, it relies a lot more on meaning and trying to convey specific experiences or emotions, and the words aren't only chosen for their meaning, but also kind of how they sound. Now, so first, again, we're still focusing on kind of like the revising aspect. These are some elements to kind of consider when you're looking at a piece of prose. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some things that you guys can think about. If when you are editing, you find like there's some extra stuff that you want to kind of talk about to the student, you're more than welcome to. Please don't feel like you have to kind of stick to what we've just given you. Some of the stuff you might want to look at when you're looking at prose is the clarity. So do you, as the reader, kind of understand what the author is attempting to share? Does it kind of make sense to you? Next up is the dialogue. Is it kind of believable and convincing? And, does the dialogue reflect the character that's speaking it? Does it fit with how they have been behaving within the story? Exposition, another way to think of that, I guess, is also plot. Is there enough, does the reader have enough knowledge of the events in the story? Do they understand what's going on? Does it make sense to the reader? And is the pacing a bit too fast or too slow? You also have contrasting elements. So kind of different elements of the story being put next to each other. So that might be the contrast of characters. It could be something as granular as the contrasting of sentences. Is there a lot of long sentences? Is there too many short sentences? Is there a balance of both? So looking at a piece of writing and kind of identifying different elements, and is there enough of a contrast between them? And then characterization. The motivations of the characters apparent? Are they convincing? And how are the characters being used in the story? Are they being used to advance the story, or are they kind of there as set dressing? Do they serve purpose to the story? And maybe before I move on to poetry, if anyone had any questions on those certain topics or elements that we've just spoken about. I'm going to quickly look at the chat, see if there are any questions. No, cool. And again, this if you have any questions towards the end, please feel free to ask them as well. Next up, we have poetry. So when you receive a piece of poetry, again, these are some of the things that you might want to try to identify or try to comment on as a way to kind of provide a more substantial feedback to the student. So the world, is there a clear sense of the world that you're in? The world of the poem, what are the rules that kind of govern this piece of writing? The persona, is the perspective memorable? Does it add to the poem? Who is speaking? And this one in particular, I just want to quickly touch on is that even not just students, even new people who are introduced to the world of poetry, especially spoken word, feel like with persona, the only persona that they can use in a poem is themselves as an individual, as a person. But something you might want to expand on or help the kids kind of think more about is there any other type of persona that they could take on to the poem that's just not themselves? Is there certain elements or emotions that they might want to try to use as the person speak in a poem that's just not themselves? Aesthetic vision, I might get Bilal to speak on that a little bit more in a bit, but is there a sense of aesthetic vision or form being used? So I guess you can also talk about it being the tone or the mood, but also visually aesthetic. You notice, depending on how much you guys know about poetry, but especially with there's a whole kind of branch of poetry on Instagram that's literally poetry that's designed for Instagram, and there's very much a visual element to it, and there is also an example that I might show you guys in a bit. The content, what is the story of the poem? Is it kind of clear what's happening in the poem? And then the emotions, does the piece evoke certain emotions? Now, as I go on, what you guys will also notice is that there is going to be an overlap between these elements over each other. There will be pieces of poetry that you notice has exposition and dialogue. There will be pieces of writing that you notice have certain emotional qualities and a certain sense of world building, should I say. So before I move forward, Bilal, would you like to quickly touch on aesthetic vision?
Oh my gosh, I was just remarking on how great I am at multitasking, and then I lost my place. Yes. Kev, do we want to show an example of a poem when we're talking through this? So while Kev brings that up, this is the Hanif poem, yeah? While Kev, oh, he already brought it up. This is a poem from an American poet, Hanif Abdul Rakib. I totally recommend that you look him up. He's a contemporary poet, so he's writing currently in America. And I think it's had a huge influence on kind of poetry for even kind of young seniors in high school, but mostly for like, emerging writers. And his work is a really, really great example of aesthetic vision in poetry. And the best way I have of describing like aesthetic vision in poetry is that kind of feeling you get when you're looking at it and when you read it. And it's kind of like different styles of music. And I always think about it like if I'm sitting down and I hear the start of Bohemian Rhapsody, I instantly know that that's a Queen song. Like I totally feel that that's their kind of style, and that I know what to expect. And it's kind of similar with poets, that they have their kind of vision of what they want their poetry to look like and sound like. And oftentimes that vision and that style goes against what is expected when it comes to, you know, the form of writing. And especially when you're thinking about it compared to prose writing and story writing. So if you have a poem and you look at it, and even this one specifically, where that first line is, all them black boys in the hood, had they wallets unearthed in cities. And if you were to compare that to, you know, like a line in a story, and if you were editing it like it was a line in a story, you would just go, so much of this doesn't make sense to me. Like the voice is a bit strange, and the sentences aren't fully formed, and you haven't given me enough information. And we as editors and people who are helping revise student work need to be really careful not to kind of sully that aesthetic vision that some kids might have from their work. And we don't want to look at the choices they're making in their poems as mistakes, but rather as experimentation. And that initial question that Kevin asked about how does this poem make you feel is a lot more important than do you completely understand what's happening. At the same time though, and to finish my rant, it's also important to think about the hospitality of your writing when it comes to your readers. And I often say this to kids, like if you're sharing this work with an audience, creative writing is not telepathy. Your audience is not going to be able to read your mind. So if you as editors read this poem or a poem like this and go, I actually do need more information, you can definitely recommend that to the students and to the young writers, but also just keep in mind that you're not trying to kind of get rid of their unique style and voice. So that's kind of the things that we consider around aesthetic vision. Whenever I look this way, it's because I'm looking at Kevin. He's sitting next to me. He's above 1.5 meters away. It's really great. That's it from me.
Bilal, there's a question in the chat if you wanted to address that.
Would you like to read out the question, Lemissa?
Fiona asked, I actually love the poem, but what does the shape add?
Oh my God, my favorite question ever, Fiona. Great question. I feel like the shape of poetry is a really, really ephemeral tool to use, even for really practice writers. And I feel like sometimes people make choices that are there just for the sake of trying to make it look like a poem. And other times it's because of a really specific reason. For Hanif, and if I was to do a really quick analysis, this poem is him kind of celebrating the discursive style of his writing. And when you think of discursive text, it's kind of about how like, I'm going to tell you a story, and that story is kind of going to veer somewhere else, and then it's going to veer back to where I started, and then it's going to veer somewhere else again. And that idea is reflected in the shape of the poem as well. So it's kind of like him talking about his memories, and then goes to his like commentary about the place that he grew up, and then back to another memory. And if that poem was written just, you know, left a line down the side of the page, you would lose that feeling. And the other thing about like suggesting feedback to students, especially if it's poetry, and always ask if you guys aren't sure, but that's why we encourage you to read as much poetry as possible, is like, you can suggest stuff like this when you're revising student work. You can do an extra version at the bottom of a Google Doc and just go, hey, you can totally ignore this if you want, but I got your poem and I like chopped up bits of it and I did this, and just like have a read through it and see how you feel about it. And if you hate it, just ignore it. But also like, that's the point of poetry, is to experiment. And then I feel like that's why that shape is added. So it's also a huge thing with line breaks, and Margaret Atwood does amazing examples of line breaks if you want to look up some more. Cool, I'm gonna stop ranting. Oh my gosh.
Thank you very much for that, Bilal. And maybe if you like, could you also add the name of the poet into the chat if you have a chance? Thank you. Cool, thank you very much, Bilal. And also just another last, I mean, Bilal has brilliantly covered most of the points I wanted to talk about anyway, but then to also, when we're talking about crossover, there's very much a kind of a story or an exposition in this poem as well. So again, just kind of really hitting back that point that you are going to find certain crossovers. Next up is this piece of writing. I'm sorry, but what was the prose that you chose? What was her name again? The one sentence.
what that I was writing in the kitchen scene?
Yes.
It's from a famous novel that I've forgotten. Ask for a movie.
But yeah, so what you have on screen there is a piece of prose. But again, if you kind of read through it, I would say that there's very much some poetic elements or qualities in there that you can identify. So when you're looking at these crossovers, don't feel like you only have to stick to one certain way, one certain grouping or being able to give feedback. Feel free to kind of try to experiment and try to utilize and also kind of identify and say, oh, I noticed that, this certain line or this certain paragraph has quite a poetic or a prose element to it as well. Namissa, would you like to cover this kind of framing feedback aspect?
Yeah, sure. So we've covered a lot of this previously. We've mentioned bits where we're framing feedback in a way that is positive, and always framing feedback as a suggestion or as an opportunity, which both Bilal and Kevin have already talked about. So giving them praise, very specific, honest praise. With poetry, thinking about the hospitality of your writing, like Bilal has mentioned before. And with prose, again, writing is not telepathy. We can't read minds. So not being afraid to ask as many questions as you can to the writer and really understand what they're trying to, what their message is essentially. So in the tip sheet, Bilal has worded like helpful phrases for us to use, which I think are really, really helpful. So if you are confused about how to frame your feedback, you can write, as a writer, I feel that a lot of writers do something like this, or good writers often, I don't know, have a metaphor in this or something like that. And framing everything as an opportunity. So I really like what you've done with this character here, and I really want to know more about their blah, 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 blah. So always framing it in the positive and then giving the suggestion. Which I think is something that we're all familiar with anyways. It's just a matter of writing it in and making it so that the student understands. And also, so it was as a good writer, you would frame it that way, or as a reader. So as a reader, I feel that this message has come across. Is this what you were trying to achieve? What other ways could we maybe possibly get to this where you want to be? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Namissa. And sorry?
Did you want to add something to that?
No, except for the fact that, again, I think, everyone here that has worked with students are kind of already very familiar with how you do that. You know what works. So I would suggest very much trying to incorporate the way that you're already working with students. And it's just a matter of trying to somehow transplant that over kind of this digital format or world, I guess. But yeah, thank you for that. So we're pretty much almost done, and now we're going to wrap it up again with everything that we've talked about, trying to give another round of feedback. So you are going to do the same thing, the 1 star and 1 wish that we talked about during the beginning, and then the additional feedback. And with the additional feedback, I would like you guys to try to incorporate all of the things that we've just talked about. And of course, some of this might not have retained in your head, and that's completely fine. Do the best you can. But also after the workshop, again, we will be sending out a tip sheet, kind of just summarizing everything that we've kind of covered today. So I will maybe give you, for this one, maybe I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll give you guys 2 minutes for this piece of writing here. So 1 star, 1 wish, and any additional feedback that you might want to give, and hopefully utilizing some of the stuff that we've just talked about today. And I will start the timer now. 30 seconds left. Excellent. And just kind of wrapping up any last thoughts that you may have and sending that in. All right. Thank you for everyone who shared, and hopefully you were able to kind of utilize some of the techniques and elements that we have just talked about. I'm just going to quickly cover Google Doc and how that works and what it might look like. Again, we haven't 100% confirmed that this is how it's going to work, but it is what we're aiming for. And if there's anything that's still confusing after this, Sankey and Twee will be able to kind of organize something with you individually to kind of go over if it's still a bit confusing. So I'm just going to use the tip sheet as a example. There we go. So over here, when you receive a piece of writing from the student, it's going to probably look something like this. After you read through the piece of writing, if there's certain parts that you kind of want to talk about, all you simply have to do is kind of highlight a sentence or paragraph or phrase, whatever it is that you might want to talk about. When you highlight something, you would notice that on the side here, you have a little box or a little element that pops up here. All you got to do is you see there when you hover over it, it says add a comment. When you add a comment, your little a name should pop up, and all you got to do is write, this is a comment. Okay, comment, and now there's your feedback will pop up on the side there. And that's a very, very basic and general gist to how Google Doc works. It's quite straightforward once you kind of wrap your head around it. But again, if you have any questions, maybe towards the end, we can kind of cover that. But again, Sankey and Twee will kind of be able to help you in that regard as well if you need it. So that's pretty much it for today. So just to kind of wrap up, if there's anything that you guys can take away today, it's just, again, focusing on the outcomes. Just as long as your feedback in some way helps them to develop those kind of 3 outcomes that we talked about, you do a great job and you do fine, no doubt. And some other points that we thought were important to highlight is that the feedback is kind of optional for the students, and kind of giving them that option means that it builds a sense of security for them to know that they're able to kind of pick and choose what they like. We also covered the personal versus the technical feedback. And again, the personal is very subjective. It's very much based on how you feel as a reader reading this piece of writing. How does that make you feel? And that the important thing to take away from that is being able to identify as many details as you can from that. And with technical, there's quite a lot to cover, so I'll let you guys kind of look over that in the tip sheet once Sankey sends that out. To kind of build on that is to kind of just use a checklist if you feel like you're lost at any time. If you kind of go through what we've talked about, what you will receive in the tip sheet, you should do fine. Then also, most importantly, is to kind of already do what you're doing when you are working with students in the classroom, is that really much kind of celebrating the work and praising them when you can. And lastly, again, outcomes. Just focus on the outcomes and you'll be fine. And that's pretty much it for the workshop. Thank you everyone for joining us. I might open it up to the chat if you guys have any questions at all. Or Sankey, if there's anything you want to add as well, feel free to do so. This is the time to do so.
Thank you, Kevin, Lamissa, and Bilal for leading that. I do not have any of that knowledge, so I learnt a lot as well. I just wanted to, firstly, did anyone have any questions that arose from that? If you were to receive the students' writing, do you feel fairly confident in the way that you would be able to approach it, having done this training? Cool. At any stage, as Kevin's mentioned, you've got support. So Lamissa, Kevin, myself, possibly Bilal, if he's not to run off his feet with the after school programs, will all be available on different days of the week for you to reach out to. You can reach us via the Story Factory Volunteering, and then I'll kind of throw out from there to whoever's available. Any kinds of questions, if you want to hop on the phone to us, we can do a little Zoom and have a look at the piece of writing that you're working on. Especially as this is such a new thing for everyone, like, don't feel like you have to go away and just suddenly remember all of this and do it all by yourself. We're here. And I also just wanted to ask everyone if they could just pop down the days, if you could pop down the days that you're available in the chat on average of a week, and then I'll kind of pull together a roster and I'll explain a little bit more about how that works, which I touched on in my original email when I email out the tip sheet. Again, it's a trial for us to see how this works. So there might be tweaking in the process as it goes. Your feedback is always welcome at every stage through that process as well to make sure that it works for everyone. And thank you for your time, for giving up your time and bearing with us while we haven't really had many opportunities over term 2 and being ready, willing and available. Oh, so the turnaround time, I'm pretty sure the last time I talked to Craig, he had, I think it was a couple of weeks that they were expecting, and we were thinking that we would give volunteer tutors a week to turn it around, so you've got a bit of time. So the idea would be that, say, if Lorena's available on a Tuesday, I get student work come in on a Tuesday, I would allocate to Lorena. Lorena then has a week to have a look at it and have that ready by the following Tuesday. And that gives us time to check in with each other. If you need any more support, you can kind of make that work around your day if you want to get it done on the Tuesday, or you can start it on the Tuesday, finish it whenever you have time. Yes, Lorena.
So just a dumb question. The piece of writing comes via email in a Google Doc?
It might do. I think this will be dependent on how the student work comes to us. So I think we've only received a handful of student work. It could be via Google Doc or it could be via Word Doc. Okay. So we'll have some notes around how to do edits in Word document. It's very similar, but the buttons are just slightly worded. Okay. Yeah. You always have the option as well, I think, of just pulling out the bits that you want to comment on, saving that as a separate thing, or emailing that through and I can pop that into a document. That's totally okay as well. Again, it's a learning process for all, but it's a good question.
Can I say I'm available Mondays?
You sure can.
Okay, so put me down for that.
That worked out well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorena. And Bilal, got to hear your voice as well.